Oprah, Can You Hear Me? A conversation by Julie Benetti and Susan Barbaro is a production of EI Publishing in association with EI Alliance. Copyright 2018. Music is courtesy of New Threads from their self-titled album.
Don't you feel like everything's gonna change, dear?
Thank you for joining us for part 3 of Oprah versus Donald 2020. I'm Julie Benetti, and I'm here with Susan Barbaro, and we are reflecting upon and integrating our book, Donald J. Trump, Do You Stand With Him? Who Does He Stand With? The science and energy behind Trump that has 12 science principles in it, and we are looking at the last 4 to consider as part of our podcast. Oprah, can you hear me? What would be the situation, and what would Oprah need to do, considering now that Donald Trump is president of the United States?
I need to stop running from life, I know. I need to stop running away as I grow.
And so the 8th principle is, science notes that perception is more defined when the background contrasts with what is being seen. And this one can be a little bit difficult to comprehend, yet if we think of it by thinking about the contrast, for example, most people can relate to negative backgrounds. And so there's a lot of, negativity. That's how they view their world, and that's how they see things. And if you can figure out what the contrast is, you can understand better what you're seeing. And I think what we say with Donald Trump is his winning is always in the background. And so we tried to figure out what is his contrast. And I'm really kind of making this as concise as possible. We figured that it's possibly the not winning and the fight surrounding that.
So if I can just take a step back, when you talk about contrast, I mean, how well you see something is defined. If you have a white background and I want to show somebody a white shirt, you don't really see it. But if I put, a black background and I walk in now with my white shirt, now it's very clear.
Right.
And how you see the white shirt is going to be dependent upon a black background or a blue background or a gray background. If you have a yellow background, it can look yellow, dirty. If it's gray and versus black would be nice and crisp. So what you see is really dependent upon the focus and then the background. And with Trump, the more he can contrast the two, the better he stands out. Mm-hmm. And so I use that as an example because that helps me to understand the principle. And then you say, so what a person brings, and because now we're talking about people, and that's what you were saying, is that with people, if you had a negative, you had a bad upbringing, or you've been poor, and if you never had money, everything revolves around money, and everything is poor, and how rich or how whatever, that's going to contrast everything. So money versus someone who focuses on something else, money is not as big a deal. You don't see it so much. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we're talking about Trump bringing in now winning. How do you make winning stronger? I guess it would be, like you said, talking about not winning. And how does he do the not winning is by doing all this crazy stuff, that things, and we keep saying he kind of throws out a steak and watches everybody go crazy and scream and yell because it makes the contrast of him stand out more.
Right. And I think that's the most important part of this, is thinking of the contrast of our situation. And when you're aware of that contrast and you have it in the forefront of your mind and you're consistently reminded of it, then you can maintain your perception. And so expressing that idea that, he's kind of throwing raw steak in the middle of people and creating chaos helps to create that contrast, and even now he is the president. So, what is, and it's not an opposite. It's kind of raising the volume on something else. Right. That analogy you gave is great because it does a great pictorial representation of what this principle is, because science is saying that the perception is more defined. And that's really the key here. And his perception is more defined because of...
I mean, isn't this also, I'm going to just go off and like the Kanye West. It's like any publicity is good publicity, good or bad publicity, because each one is contrast, no matter which way it goes. And so one would ask, can Oprah create contrast to herself? She's a mogul. She's made an empire be in a certain way. So, and hers has been much more public than Trump's is, and we talked about this before. So I'm just saying, what would the contrast be? And can she support that? I mean, you've got to be convincing in the contrast.
Right.
You can't just go and say, oh, well, I'm a jerk. It'll be interesting.
And again, because and that's an important part, you have to be convincing of nobody else but yourself in the contrast, because it heightens your perception. Because what we see is dependent upon what is in our focus and what we place in our background. And if you're not doing that balance, you're not having that contrast, and your perception probably can falter to a degree.
And the only other thing I would say is that a lot of us have dysfunctional contrasts. I don't know how else to describe it. It's based on a lack. So therefore, everything we see is for everybody else. Donald Trump creates his contrast.
Right.
It doesn't define him, he defines it.
Right.
And that's all I'm saying is, can we all do that?
Because that's a really powerful place to operate from.
When you create it.
Mm-hmm. And science has proved it, and now we could even say Donald Trump has proved it. So, Oprah?
I need to stop running from life, I know. I need to stop running away as I grow.
Number 10, physics challenges that when you observe something, like a stone, for example, you are observing the effects of the stone upon yourself. So, not losing yourself in all those words. I think the greatest way to synopsize this is that when you're presented with something that occurs, whether it's truth or not, it's what you see and how you see it that affects you. And that's what ends up mattering to you.
We both found the same line that we were
And
going
that's
to say. Yeah.
And that's really what ends up mattering to you. And I think we start off this little chapter about thinking of politicians traveling in a boat. And I think it's a good analogy. And they're along the ocean of American people. And the boat is exclusive and the average American is not invited. Okay, so this is just a little picture we're describing. People watch the political process through the media like a streaming episode of The Love Boat. And like the cast, the politicians stay in the boat because of the political correctness of it. And they're required to live in that situation. And the American people are kind of outsiders, kind of drowning in the tepid water with whatever the situations go on. And so that's kind of the way politics has been presented to us. And now I know the arena is changing a bit because the average person is starting to get more involved, especially with the political races that occurred. And I'm not political, so I just share that part because we know that's a given. Yet, if you're not the politician's neighbor or dry cleaner, pizza deliverer, and even then, who knows what the truth is? You really only know what the truth is coming from someone else. And so that affects you, and that's what matters. And that's where you maintain your perception of it. And if you're getting sensationalized versions of somebody, it depends on what your beliefs are and what your opinions are and where you're going to go with it.
So when we think of Trump, he demonstrates that he's just as comfortable as us being outside of the water. Hey, I've been outside of the boat with you guys all this time. And he says things, and sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he said it. Yet he says things that everybody's mumbled. Everybody has said kind of behind the scenes. We talked about this, I think, in one of the other podcasts, not to be aggressive. He's like, oh, I got big hands. You know what? And everyone's like, oh, I can't believe he said that. And okay, but yet nobody said, what does he mean? Everybody knew. So secretly he says things that make us feel like X, Y, and Z. And actually, I heard a comedian got up one time and made the joke that he sounds like, the uncle that comes to the table, like, I gotta be building a wall. Oh, they're gonna build a wall. And it was really funny. Yet, who can't relate to that uncle that comes in and sits at the table and says these things? And when he says it, the truth of the matter is, it's what we hear and what we see and how we are affected. It's like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. I laugh. So what does that mean? I can relate to Trump. Even if I have nothing in common with him, there's a little bit of that I can relate to him.
And that feeling stays with you.
And that's what's important. It's not important whether I can or not, whether what he said was true or not, but it's the fact that I can relate to him, which changes now. And so then that changes how I see him because of how it affected me.
Right. And that energy almost takes a life of its own.
Yeah.
And the momentum. And that's what Donald Trump's powers of persuasion and all that energy versus in the momentum and everything, and his triggers and his buzzwords. And I saw some newscast a month or so ago where they were waiting anxiously for a speech he gave is he going off the printed word? He's going, oh, there he goes. And it's like, what is this, a game now? Saying that was the allurement. And that's, his buzzwords and and all those little things actually end up uniting people in that energy.
Makes people have a certain feeling. And it's that, oh, I belong with him. He doesn't fit in. Oh, I don't fit in. Oh, but look he's saying what I'm saying, or he's saying things I've heard that no one else says. And so then you feel, and it creates just a feeling. And once again, it's just one more scientific principle on his side. And I would say, in many situations, this should be Oprah's superpower. She should have that superpower, and whether or not she's aware of it, and whether or not she uses it in a different way, because that's how she's made, again, I keep using the word, her empire, is using feeling to have people have a sense of, oh my God, I'm like her. She's like me. I love her. Right. And she's doing well. Oh my God, I love that. I can do well. But again, we talked about this earlier. She's going to have to look at that superpower and readjust it.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see if she can or not.
It will.
I need to stop running from life, I know. I need to stop running away as I grow.
Number 11. In Chinese theory, the belief is that where thought or intention goes, the qi follows. If the thought or intention interrupts the smooth flow of qi, this qi can become stuck or stagnant. If left unaddressed, it can create an energy blockage. So, moving a little bit aside here, qi is the energy or life force that runs through us. And so the idea is that our thoughts and intentions have an effect on where and how the qi flows and where it travels. So our words and thoughts. And so I think when we were looking at this one, we looked at that concept and integrated it to people and looked at how Donald Trump was talking to people and what was occurring, and knowing ourselves from, being out on the front lines and the situations of what's going on and other people and what you hear and friends and family, there's a lot of stagnancy, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of blockages of qi, you could say, in that sense. And the fascinating thing about Donald Trump is that he would tap that energy, not even fearing it, would just go right in and tap it, and it would move. Just almost embracing the anger and tap it and move. And a lot of times in his stump speeches or whatever, you can see, because, the press would show us these little sound bites of him kind of saying, yeah, get that guy over there who's causing all that. So there's an immensity of layers of anger and whatever going on, and people protesting at his stump speech. And he's telling the rest of the group, yeah, get rid of it, yeah, get rid. He's interrupting his speech. So he's tapping into where the people are and where their frustration is and where their blockage is. And when that occurs, what happens? It moves.
So, because this is Chinese traditional medicine, and being an acupuncturist, it's near and dear to my heart. And exactly like you said, when it's like anything, if think of a hose, if there's a kink in the hose, the water's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and the minute you kind of unkink it, it goes kind of crazy. The hose sprays and it goes crazy, yet in that first minute it's like, whoa, and then it kind of goes back to normal. It's a little bit of a release. It's almost, anything that you do that's been built up, the pressure builds up, let out a little of the pressure, and it's like, it's crazy, but then there's a little bit of relief. And we can see that when we talk about some of these physical things, but when you bring it to a person, and anger, it's almost like they're angry. If someone's angry and you kind of poke them and they scream at you, then they feel a little bit better. Not too good for the person on the receiving end, but as you said, he could be in it and stay in it. He could tap it and tap it and tap it and bring it to the force. Most people try to let's let it pass. Don't bring it to the forefront. Kind of let it sit back there. He brought it to the forefront, whether he knew it or not, but by tapping it and releasing some of it, people have that sense of, oh, I feel a little bit better.
Yeah, that sense of relief is the thing that encapsulates and
that's-
allures people as well.
That's what I'm saying. Most people like, oh, don't say this, don't say that. So you're sitting there talking to someone, and it's almost like no one's talking about, the white elephant in the middle of the room. And it's like he goes right for it, and it's like, but then it's like, oh, I feel a little bit better. And then you want to watch him again because he gets you kind of riled up, and then boom, it moves, and then you're like, oh, I feel better. Whether you agree with him or not, which is maybe on a political standpoint, I don't know how it worked for him, but that's why people love to watch him. That's why he made so much in the TV ratings, because he'd say things and people love that shock factor. Can you believe he said that? But it also released something, and he knew that. That's human nature, and it's interesting.
And what's funny is you're wonderfully kind of encapsulating this principle. I'm sitting here thinking, of Oprah. And okay, you first go back to her shows and all the dissension that would occur and all the things that were occurring. And it's almost kind of not really entering in and tapping that, but not tapping that blockage, but putting a Band-Aid.
Yes.
And that's a dangerous place to be, because putting a Band-Aid on it is not what he does. And it gives not really relief, but actually it gives
more
kind
frustration.
of a sense of frustration.
It gives you that feeling like
Right.
I can't express what I want to say.
Right.
And it's almost like when someone's passive aggressive and they say something and you want to respond, but you're like, well, they said it in a way that I really can't. And it makes you just like, and it creates frustration. And so to be able to do that, you've really got to be able to walk right into that space of chaos.
And this is funny because I keep on getting this visual of the old days of Phil Donahue. And he started it where he would run around with the microphone and someone would start yelling from the other side of the studio and he would go running with the microphone and people loved when he ran. Yet it never seemed like he was, situated within what the comment was. He was just kind of running with the microphone and he had the person on. He wasn't saying, I feel your pain and this is where I am and this is, and I don't want to synopsize that because I don't know Phil Donahue as well, but I remember that visual of the energy of him running from one side of the studio to the next, getting those comments. And the interesting part about it was that was a way, I think, of when the chi was kind of stagnant and people were there and whatever the topic was, controversial or not, a lot of times there were controversial ones, he was tapping and there was a release and there was a comment, yet he wasn't sucker punched or he didn't fall down from the release. It never seemed like that. He was always able to run to the next one. And so looking at Donald Trump and the way he can tap that and then how it gives...
he not only tapped it, but he used that to add to the momentum of his campaign.
Yes.
So he had a way of going in, and I think the first thing is a little bit, it's not being always politically correct. And I don't mean being disrespectful or racist or biased or bigoted in any way, religious, color, anything. But it's being able to state your truth and being in the space of being who you are. And I'm not saying he is any of those things. I'm just speaking from my own standpoint to say what I want to say, knowing where I'm coming from and being free to say that. I'm not saying calling someone a name for the sake of it. Most people don't.
Right.
We're always worrying about, do I, and I'll use a woman like, oh, if I say, oh, Chica, hey, Chica, I'm like, oh, Jesus, someone saying, well, that's not the right thing to call a woman. You're supposed to say, and it's like, get out of here. I'm not being mean to other women. I'm not being anything else. I'm just joking with. So I think he's able to do that. And whether or not Oprah can do it, she doesn't have to do this. And again, I just want to say with all these principles, we're not saying she has to follow them, but she should be aware of what he's doing.
Right, and that
or
awareness.
Someone should be.
That awareness is right, exactly. And just one thing to add is that it's a volatile space to be in. And to me, there's a huge immensity of curiosity to the stay factor of staying in that volatile space. I mean, you got to come up for air sometimes.
But that's his thing. That's his thing. When we get into 12, it talks about chaos.
Yes.
He thrives in chaos. Most people do not. They do not like chaos. And he's learned to be able to be in it. And most of us are better in order, not in the chaos.
And which the funny thing is, let's just segue right into number 12.
I need to stop running from life, I know. I need to stop running away as I grow.
Science explains that the natural order of things is disorder or chaos, which then leads to order, and then back to chaos. The I Ching, known as the Book of Changes in ancient Chinese texts, shares that the only thing constant is change. And so the funny thing about chaos is, I mean, that's just, to me, that's just so enlightening that the natural order of things is chaos. So futzing around, trying to put everything into order is not a waste of time, but, you know, everything's going to go back into chaos. And
By
so,
doing, even if you do nothing.
right. And so I'm going to plug a little bit. We did a bunch of podcasts on the Kybalion, which looks at energy and polarity and duality and all those things. And when you get really into the nitty gritty of energy, and then you translate it in how to, you know, have relationships with other people and how to use that in your conversation and how you live daily, it's fascinating because, you know, if everything starts with chaos, I mean, you go right back to the Big Bang. I mean, that's how the development of the universe, of however you want to say it, but I mean, there's a complete chaos, yet, you know, there's an element of uncertainty. Who wants to be in that when it's really, our brains are wired to search for certainty?
So, yet, everyone gives chaos the bad rap. Who wants to be in chaos? Yet, if there weren't chaos, there would be no change.
Right.
There would be no growth. There would be no newness. Life would be blah, boring. We'd be amoebas and nobody would ever. There's chaos that creates. And if you understand that without anyone doing anything, chaos goes to order, which goes to chaos, which goes to order. And when those chaotic periods occur, if you hold on to whatever it is you need to get through it without trying to eliminate it, avoid it, you come out smooth sailing. You get through it, and sometimes things work in your favor. You don't realize, and I think he gets that.
And the funny thing is, one of the statements we have in our book here is we look at Mr. Trump, and it seems as though he has learned how to live and succeed in this chaos while we struggle against it. And I laughed a little, and it's not funny, but there are a multitude of people on the news saying, yes, we're trying to impeach him, and he's still there.
Right, I know.
And it's like, once again, being not very political, looking at the energy,
yes.
Wow! I mean, it's completely chaotic, layers of chaos, like an onion upon chaos that move into order. Why would you get in the way of that?
And I think that's a lot of the things that when they would ask him, well, what are you going to do about this? And he says, don't you worry, we're going to take care of that. And people are like, he didn't say anything. But I mean, I think part of that is, well, when the situation arises, we'll deal with it. And I'm not saying he's done that. This isn't a support of, wow, he did it. But if you understand, he doesn't get caught up in the way. I mean, one of the quotes I'm going to read from the book is, he may, meaning Trump, may or may not be clear on what he's going to do once he arrives wherever he's going to arrive. But if the natural order is always order to chaos and back again, why is the how he's going to do whatever even relevant? It's going to be done on its own.
Right. And that's a huge part of energy to understand and kind of live with. In uncertainty, not grappling the how is very hard to do.
It's hard.
It's really hard. And, you know, it's funny. It's so much more powerful. I mean, if you set up a whole schedule and a whole plan and something's going to occur. If you're more flexible and you're not grappling with the how and you focus on other things, it's a lot more powerful. And the funny thing, we even ask a question. He doesn't really illustrate a lot of his plans, and he didn't at the time that we wrote this book. And it's funny because, you know, our statement was, how can he plan for a situation he's not really in yet?
Right.
And that's really powerful, too, because you can't plan for everything.
And, you know, it's actually, when you say that, I think of past presidents, and I'm not going to name any in particular, yet they've got all these eloquent solutions to everything. And when they're in, you know, and I will use Obama, I will say Obama, he had all these eloquent solutions to everything. And then when he was president, he had such low ratings at certain points, very low ratings. Then when he was no longer president, everyone's like, oh, come back. And it's like, you know, it's just funny. It's like we're never happy.
Right.
And when he was there, and not just him, I'm not picking on him, but anyone who sits there and says, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. I mean, you yell at me all the time. You say, all right, well, we're going to get together tomorrow. Let's do this, and this, and this, and this. She goes, we get together. We didn't do any of that. We end up doing something completely different. And because we try to move forward, but at the end of the day, the more that you just go with whatever comes is always more powerful, more potent than saying we're going to do this, then this, then this, then this, then this, and sticking to it regardless. You lose.
Right, because there's a beautiful presence. There's a present in being present. And so when you're present and you're ready to just act and you're ready to just engage, I mean, this goes all the way back. We can leap all the way back because that was the 12th principle, right, to some of the beginning ones where we talked about Jeb Bush and the debates, and Trump was just present. So, and when he came out with that low energy thing, and you could see Jeb Bush kind of stumbled and went, and it's not that, he wasn't qualified to be president or anything. It was just who's present. And, you can take that in your day-to-day life, because often, and this is where we take this energy and these principles, when you're in your day-to-day life and you're just present. I mean, you could sit at home the night before an interview or the night before something, a wedding or something, anything you're going to, and you could be all nervous, but you don't know what's going to occur. You just got to be present then.
Let me ask you something. So we're on the conclusion part, and I'm going to cut through everything right now and say,
I need to stop running from life, I know. I need to stop running away as I grow.
Basically, he said in conclusion, it'd be interesting to see what occurs, but now we know what occurs because he got president. And we say, can he maintain being in these energy principles? And whether or not he has, that's here or there. But I would like to ask you, Julie, we have talked about this a few times. Which one do you think is your powerful science principle? What's your superpower? Because
mine?
Your superpower in these 12, because I think we all can relate to this. And I love doing this because each time I do it, I get something different and I understand it. Of course, I reflect upon myself. And like, which one would be mine? Which one am I using for me? Which one am I using against me? Or not in my best interests?
Well, it's really hard to ask a Libra which their favorite is, so I would take a combination. I mean, I would like to take them all and kind of like sit there with Einstein and mash them all together like a ball of clay. And because I think we utilize them at different times, and you can move from one to the other, and you can use two at once.
Do you think that Einstein would have applied these to people? And if you asked Einstein which principle was his superpower, he'd probably look at you like you had three heads.
Well, I didn't ask that question. You did.
I know, but because he applied these, it was pure physical.
Right.
He never really, as far as I'm aware, applied these to people. I find that fascinating.
I don't know, though, because, if I met him and we had a conversation or we sat being present, I don't know if that would be true or not.
No, I'm not saying he would say you're wrong. I'm saying, I think he'd look at it and say, well, that's brilliant. To use science, which we think of a physical, an action has a reaction, and we think of velocity and all physics equations. Yet, I don't think anyone sat back and says, well, let's approach this to people. And of course, it's not on a people level. It's really people with the energy. It still is energy. I just find that fascinating. The benefit I get, and hopefully the people that are listening to this, gives you a little perspective. But then you can sit back and look at this yourself and say, that's actually a fascinating concept.
And of course, science and nature out there, and there are teachers. And so when we take these principles, I mean, mathematicians and scientists and quantum physicists, thinking about stuff, have worked really hard to find the way particles and things interact, and things that we can't even see interact, which is funny. So these things that we can't even see are a part of us.
And why would you not make the leap to, everyone says this is great, we can do this, but take another step, and no one does that. Right. I mean, if you read this and you understand what we said, Trump was a marvelous example for us, like him or not. But it's like, wow, he completely helped us align them.
And so these particles are a part of us, so why wouldn't the principles be a part of us as well? And why wouldn't we be able to use them to our advantage, to enhance our relationships? And, there's been a structure of people getting together that are trying to share science principles in a very easy way,
but
because science is in us.
They're still talking about it in terms of planetary movements. They're talking about it in terms of stars, in terms of the way, again, it's a physical they don't go into the energy, which is, what's the word I want to use? It's not as right. You can't necessarily see it unless you observe it.
Right.
You have to observe. You can't see it. Or you can sit and read the book and have a conversation. It's just reading a book and being open-minded.
And it's important because it brings you down to presence.
Okay.
And so once again, thank you for joining us. The book is Donald J. Trump. Do you stand with him? Who does he stand with? The Science and Energy Behind Trump. And you just completed our, 3-part podcast series on Oprah versus Donald 2020. So we're out here, Oprah. Can you hear us? Thank you for listening to this production from EI Publishing in association with EI Alliance. Visit eipublishing.com for more Energized podcasts and books. Find Donald J. Trump, Do You Stand With Him? Who Does He Stand With? The Science and Energy Behind Trump as a book or ebook on Amazon and Google Play. Find Growing Pains by New Threads on their self-titled album available on iTunes, Spotify, Bandcamp, or at newthreads.us.